Okay, this is actually part 10. I guess I inadvertently combined 8 and 9 being the booster placement and the cable runs, but in part 10 here we're going to take a look at what it takes to get electricity into the boosters. Looking at the front of the drone, there are two sets of cables, black and red, on each side. Those are the leads coming from the battery, and in order to get good access to them, this main chassis needs to be loosened from the shell and raised up. It doesn't have to be completely removed. In fact, the wiring that goes from the circuit board out to the motors is soldered in place. So in order to completely remove it, you'd have to cut those wires. But fortunately, we don't need to. The silicon that they've used to hold these wires down into the shell does need to be loosened on the first section here, though. But once you get the 4 screws out, you can just carefully lift that chassis up off of the alignment bosses and then put something underneath to hold it up in place. Once you've got these wires exposed, that's where you can tap in to power your boosters, one or both. I would not recommend, and I've never seen anybody recommend, trying to resolder to the existing connections. Seemed like good advice to me. Not sure why. I mean, I can think of all kinds of bad things that could happen. It seems like it would be easier, but I don't believe it would be a safe way to do it. So what you need to do is just remove a little bit of the coating on the wires, and I've got other pictures that'll show this, but I did these offset. So the power wire as far, in this case, to the right as I could comfortably get, and then the grounding wire I tapped in over here. So even though I sealed those back up, if the wires would rub together, we don't have the chance for a short circuit there. But remove a section, maybe a 1/4 of an inch long. Just gently cut around the wire, not cutting too deep so you don't cut into the actual copper threads. Then the set of tweezers, just pull that piece of covering out of the way. Here you can see I did the same thing with the grounding wire. Now, rather than cut the wire, I just used my 90-degree pick to basically waller out a hole, just to separate those strands. And then on the power leads, I just bent a hook on the end of the wire so I could basically just clip that wire in and solder it. So here's what it looked like when I had the wires in place but not yet soldered. Actually, I think I might have had the ground soldered there. And there I've applied the solder. Doesn't take much, just tinned up the iron real well and then set it down on there and let that drop of solder transfer to the copper wiring. And rather than try to figure out how to wrap electric tape around those, I saw this on the shelf at the hardware store, just called liquid tape. I'm sure there are various brands of it, and it seems to work real well. The cap has a brush on it, and it's a huge brush, relatively speaking. It's probably a 1/2 inch wide, so way bigger than I could effectively use in the drone. So I just used my little flat tip screwdriver, dipped it down in there, and then dabbed it on the wire all the way around. And it dried in about 5 minutes, so this is not something that you have to do and wait till the next day to come back and finish. And here you can see what it looks like once it's in place. And again, note the separation there. So even if I didn't do a real good job, if the two wires touch and rub, they're not going to short out. Because I did make sure that there was no sharp edges or points from the solder. Then I moved to the other side, did the same thing. And I'll kind of note here, I was going to use these the JST or JXT connectors, but on the advice of one of the group members, I did elect to cut those off and go with a different style. But the regulators are going to be, well, the wiring is on the upper half. The boosters are in the lower half. So if you ever want to be able to separate the two halves of the drone again, you're going to need to be able to disconnect the power wire. So that's what the intent of this plug was. You could just hardwire everything, but I don't like to build myself into a box or paint myself into a corner, as they say. Now again, use the liquid tape on the connections. Once I put everything back down in, I just wanted to reattach that wiring to the chassis. I used a hot glue gun. You could use silicone. You could probably even not do it. And that's what it looked like after I had everything done the first time. Got another shot of that zip tie here. I'm not sure. That picture seems out of place, but that was at that point that one of the group members suggested that I not use those connectors. So I went to the hobby store and got these. I'm sure there's several different brands, and probably most any would work. But it was a gold-plated pin and socket, one for each. So I soldered those in place, and this particular set came with the heat shrink tubing. And let me back up here a second. Yeah, okay. I guess I want to say that concludes this part, and next we'll look at where the regulators have to live.